It has been a full 2 years since the original release of the Ryzen 3000 CPUs and the X570 chipset motherboards, bringing PCIe Gen4 to consumer desktops for the first time. But PCIe Gen4 also brought with it increased power consumption of the chipset, forcing motherboard manufacturers to add tiny chipset fans that spin up to 10,000 RPM. 2 years on, X570 is still AMD's flagship chipset series, with a simple BIOS flash enabling support for the Ryzen 5000 series. But this also means that many peripheral features of the X570 boards are a little behind their Intel counterparts. Enter the X570S motherboards. As far as we can tell, these new X570S boards have the exact same chipset as 2 years ago. Just now, motherboard manufacturers are forgoing the fan and trying to cool the 11-watt X570 chipset with a simply bigger heatsinks. And today, we have the Gigabyte X570S AORUS Master, the top-of-the-line board in the Gigabyte's new X570S lineup. We'll be going over compatibility, features, and then discuss who should buy this board. To start off, the CPU support list is huge, supporting basically every Ryzen CPU since 2018, which are the Ryzen 2000, 3000, 5000 series CPUs, and the 2000, 3000, 4000, and 5000 series APUs as well. Physically, the X570S AORUS Master comes in the ATX form factor and is targeted at enthusiasts and overclocking. The board is surprisingly light on built-in RGB, with only the VRM heatsink being lit. You also get a backplate with thermal pads on the back for the power delivery components to connect to the backplate, which is pretty nice. Speaking of power delivery, the X570S AORUS Master features a 14-phase V-core and a 2-phase SoC with 70M power stages, a small upgrade over the original X570 Master. But just to be clear, both power delivery designs are incredibly overkill and will stay nice and cool even under extreme CPU overclocking, especially with the huge finned heatsinks Gigabyte has placed over the power delivery components. To supply all of these, the board has two 8-pin EPS power connectors. Moving on to the PCIe slots, we have 3 X16 length slots. The top slot is wired for 16 lanes to the CPU as per usual. When the second slot is used, the two slots split the CPU's 16 lanes into 8 each. The third slot is wired for 4 lanes to the chipset. The spacing between the slots allows for a 3-slot gap between the first and second GPU, and a 2-slot gap from the second to third GPU. Great for dual or triple GPU setups, but obviously no quad GPU support. Moving on to the M.2 slots. Hiding underneath all these heatsinks are a total of 4 M.2 slots, all in full PCIe Gen4 by 4 bandwidth. The first slot is connected directly to the CPU for your primary boot drive, and the other 3 slots are connected through the chipset. That makes this board and the X570S AORUS the only motherboards that can use 4 M.2 SSDs without needing to split lanes off the GPU. We'll also have a video covering the AORUS by the way, so keep a lookout for that too. All of the M.2 slots feature heatsinks with thermal pads for both the top and the bottom of the SSD. The first slot's heatsink is slightly larger and has cutouts for more surface area. The taller parts of the heatsink are also offset a little away from the GPU, which helps reduce the chances of scratching the GPU's backplate when installing or removing the GPU. For internal connectors, the front panel audio is located along the bottom edge of the board, along with 2 USB 2 connectors and 1 USB 3 connector. Gigabyte has also included what they call the G connector, to help you plug in front panel connectors without having to fumble around with every little header. The G connector even has tiny little tabs that hold the connectors in too, which is pretty great. But despite all this work, the G connector itself doesn't have clear labels showing which direction this plugs into the motherboard. So 2 steps forward, 1 step back I guess. Moving on to the right edge of the motherboard, you have a second USB 3 port exiting at a right angle and 6 SATA ports also exiting at right angles. Next to that, you also have a Thunderbolt add-in card connector, and finally, a front I/O Type-C internal header for cases that support it. For fan connectors, you get an incredible total of 10 PWM fan connectors, 1 in the top left corner of the board, 4 more in the top right, 3 on the right edge, and 2 more on the bottom. In that same thread, the board has a pair of 5V ARGB and 12V RGB headers at the top right and another pair at the bottom left of the board, as well as a singular 12V RGB header in the center of the board for some reason. One of the more interesting set of features Gigabyte has included for this board is connectors for 2 temperature sensors and a noise sensor. Gigabyte also includes the appropriate 2 temperature sensors and a noise sensor in the box, so you don't need to go buy them separately. These sensors are reported to software through the usual telemetry reporting services, so apps like Hardware Info 64 and Fan Control can pick them up. If you're building a custom water cooling loop, you can also plug water temperature sensors into the board and control fan and pump speeds without the need for an expensive dedicated controller like the Aqua Computer Quadro. For usability features, the board features a nice power button up here on the top right, with a simple reset button alongside it. Beside that is a debug code display, which is useful for debugging and overclocking. The clear CMOS button is on the rear I/O together with the QFlash Plus button, which is Gigabyte's version of BIOS flashback that allows BIOS flashing regardless of whether you have a CPU installed. Put together, this board has most of the features overclockers are looking for. What is missing, however, is Gigabyte's second BIOS functionality. There's just a single BIOS now, and even though the original X570 AORUS Master has dual BIOS and switches to manually toggle between them. For rear I/O, Gigabyte has included 4 USB 2 ports in black, 2 USB 3 ports in blue, and 6 more USB 3 Gen 2, which is 10 gigabit speed, one of those being a Type-C connector. For networking, Gigabyte has dropped the second 1 gigabit LAN port that was present on the original X570S AORUS Master, leaving just a single Intel 2.5 gigabit LAN port. For wireless connectivity, the chipset has been upgraded to the Intel AX210 model, providing Wi-Fi 6E and Bluetooth 5.2 capability. So, what do we think of this motherboard? Overall, it's a really solid high-end motherboard from Gigabyte that could easily overclock any Ryzen CPU to its limits. The quadruple M.2 capability is one of a kind, and enables the AORUS Master to be a great platform for content creators looking for a lot of ultra-fast SSD storage. Even so, the removal of the second 1 gigabit LAN is a little disappointing, though it's not likely to be an issue for most users. If you're looking for a high-end motherboard to pair with a Ryzen 9, this is a great board that could easily overclock your chip to its limits, and has plenty of peripheral features worthy of a flagship motherboard. So that's all from us here at Dreamcore Tech. Thanks for watching, leave us a comment and keep a lookout for our second video covering the X570S AORUS G.